Welcome to yet another episode of the K6 Office Hours with me, Simme, and with
Nicole van der Hoeven.
and this week we're joined by a very special guest, at least to us. We're paid to say that, right? With us we have Robin, the CEO of K6. And I'm gonna just greet you in Swedish. So, hej och välkommen till våran stream. Vi ska inte prata svenska hela streamen, men jättekul att ha dig med.
Tack, and thank you, Simme, for that Swedish introduction.
I understood tack. I understood welcome, tack.
So that means we're switching the stream to Swedish now, is it?
No.
So we're not actually paid to say this, if anyone was wondering. So we have you on today to talk about a little bit about the future of load testing, or at least that's the title of this stream. Because I know you've been in the company for quite some time. It's like 8 years, right? Or is it even more than that?
Or you're trying to be nice to me now? No, I've been here for like 13 or 14 years.
All right. So
before the stream, Robin, he calls you old, but during the stream, we don't do that.
Exactly. Yes, I've been with the company since 2007. So I've been through a lot of the different product iterations we've had and seen how the industry has also changed a lot and also not changed a lot. So there's both of those angles, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the origin of Load Impact or K6?
The origins, yeah. So the company was actually not a performance testing or load testing company initially. It was a games studio, so a games development company building massive multiplayer online games. But that was during the sort of turn of the century. And when the company was trying to find financing for financing sort of the publishing of the game, the whole .com crash happened, and it was very difficult to find any sort of financing that was interested in sort of software in general, I think. So then the company switched gears and turned to consulting, and did a whole lot of like performance engineering consulting, and then that's when the founders of the company, I'm not the founder, when they realized there was an opportunity to launch an online service, basically, compared to the open source and sort of desktop tools that existed in those days. So that's sort of the origins of the company.
So what were you doing at the very beginning? What was your role?
Well, initially when I started, I was hired as a developer to work on other sort of consulting projects that we did. So I worked on various projects. We had a client that hosted like a web hosting and DNS hosting company. So I worked on sort of low-level DNS protocol, registrar kind of support stuff, and also worked on a product for hard disk encryption. So I was a developer initially, and then when we started working on our first load testing product, I was part of the team building the tools, basically.
Can you explain why crocodiles factor in so heavily into the theme of K6?
Well, besides the fact that we just love crocodiles, we actually had two crocodiles in our first office as well. So our founder is a big reptilian enthusiast, I think I can call him. And he, for whatever reason, we have to ask him at some point, maybe another guest to the show or to the Friday office hours. Well, he for some reason had two crocodiles as pets, and he kept them in our office in a terrarium. So they were called Bert and Ed, and they were watching over our computers, I suppose. And they would every now and then escape their terrarium and would rest close to our hot machines. So that's why we have crocodiles. The crocodiles come from that fact that we've had crocodiles in our office. So that's why they've sort of stuck around. We don't have them in our office anymore. They're with some reptilian enthusiast north of Stockholm somewhere. They have a good life, as far as I've heard.
And these are the new crocodiles. There.
Yeah.
Except they're flavored for Sim and me.
Yeah. And they are actually, or the crocodile is still called Bert as well. So we really try to make that part of our of Bert's legacy, I guess. And the new one, the female one, although I would say that it's mostly a avatar version of Nicole, it's still carries the Bert name in a sense, as it's called Berta.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a nice way for them to live on, I think. It's
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Although reptilians get
obviously,
quite old, right? So they might even outlive us.
yeah. So
Perhaps.
Sim and I already know what you do. It's kind of our job to know that. But can you explain to our viewers who you are, what you do for K6 now?
Sure. So I see myself mostly as like a facilitator, right? So I try to facilitate the functions in the company to work as smoothly as they can. So removing roadblocks, etc. And sort of the more sort of hands-on kind of work I do is also sort of spread across different functions, I would say. But primarily I help out in various stages of the sales cycle on the sales side. And then I mostly also help out with product related things on the product and engineering side. Those are my two primary, I think, hands-on responsibilities, besides sort of the overall try to make the machine run smoothly.
And I think that's actually quite cool because it kind of pinpoints one of the cultural aspects of K6, at least it does for me, that you started here as an engineer, like most of us actually have. And even though maybe it's not in your official title, I still know you're an engineer at heart and still experiment a lot with different prototypes and building small proof of concepts and things like that. And that actually goes throughout the whole company. I think the amount of employees or colleagues we have that don't have an engineering background is counted on one hand. And given that we want to cater towards developers and create the best developer experience for load testing, I think that really helps because we all know what we wanted as developers, or what we still want as developers from a tool as K6.
Yeah, I've tried to like I've tried to not like slap a label necessarily on sort of like what I do or not. I mean I started programming out of sort of necessity because I needed it for one of my hobbies, and then I sort of like liked it, but it was like a means for me to do something I wanted to do, right? So if I have a need to use my engineering skill set, I will use that. If I have a need to use some other skill set, I will use that. So that's how I try to see things, right? I want to do things, whatever it is, right? If it's engineering, I'll use that. If it's something else, I'll use those skills.
Definitely. Okay, so we have James Leatherman in the chat. Welcome to the stream, James.
Hi, James.
Happy to have you again. And he actually has a question that I think is geared towards you, Robin. And he's asking, can you tell me about the decision to choose Go as the runtime engine and JS as the scripting language? This seems to be the key to making K6 a disruptive force in this space.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a great question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so when we decided to basically flip from a proprietary company to be an open source based company, we spent time evaluating different languages for the tool. So our previous proprietary tool was written in C, but we decided that was not the best code base to open source, nor the best language to use when open sourcing a tool. And we decided to go with Go because we felt at the time Go was being picked up by other tools that were targeting the sort of emerging field of DevOps and SRE. So it was, HashiCorp had their tools in Go, etc. So that's one of the reasons why we picked Go. We felt it was a good tool for the kind of target audience we were going after. And it seemed like Go was a better language if we were ever to get contributions compared to like C, C++, or Rust, which were the other languages that we were contemplating using. So that's why we picked Go, basically. because of the target audience, and we thought it was going to be easier to contribute code to a Go project. And the choice of JavaScript is simply because we used Lua as the scripting language in our previous product. And we got a lot of feedback from companies saying that they had to teach their engineers a new language, which cost them money. And they asked us why we didn't use a language that was more widely known by engineers. And if you look at the Stack Overflow yearly survey that they do, JavaScript has been topping the list of programming languages that people know for many years. So that's basically why we chose JavaScript. It's a language that a lot of engineers on both sides of the fence, if you want to call it that, front and back end, know. So those are the reasons why we picked those languages.
I can't
And
really help
testers
but
too.
Yeah, testers too. Yeah.
I can't really help but asking whether the reason for JavaScript having all of, topping the questions for Stack Overflow every year is because it's so widely adopted, or because no one really gets it. But I definitely agree with you. It makes total sense given the commodity of JavaScript to have that as a scripting layer as opposed to, for instance, Lua. Because I think Lua was quite popular with, it's still quite popular with like gaming plugins and things like that, right?
I think as an embedded language, Lua is very, very good. It's very resource efficient, and it's quite a simple language comparatively to other languages to understand. There's not a lot of complexity in the language itself. But if you try to target a broader audience, I think JavaScript is a more sane choice, especially also since we target people testing web technologies, and JavaScript is sort of the language of the web. So it makes sense from that perspective, I think.
I really appreciate it as a tester too, because it's a language that I already knew. I mean, I'm still not like an expert in it or anything, but a lot of testing tools already use JavaScript. So it really wasn't a big deal for me to switch to scripting in JavaScript. And I know this is not directed towards me, but towards you. But I think that K6 being based on Go I agree with James that it's a huge deal, because a lot of tools, for instance, are based on Java, and you really can't compare the two when it comes to performance, because Go is built with performance in mind. And I am so happy that I don't have to worry about a JVM, or having to worry about tweaking the memory that I'm assigning to it. It's just a layer of complexity that I don't really care to have to tweak when I just want to run a load test. So I totally agree with James that it is a really key part of what makes K6 so amazing and so fast.
I wasn't really here to see when we had the previous product that was written in C, but how would you say, Robin, that K6 how does K6 compare in terms of performance to the previous product, given that C is a much more optimized language, I guess, at least in case if you know what you're doing when you're programming it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think you can get very comparative performance in Go as well, given that it compiles down to machine code and is not interpreted. But yeah, I think when we did some comparisons in the early days, at least, I don't think those comparisons necessarily hold up today. But back then, in the beginning, at least, rload, as the proprietary tool was called, performed better in terms of sheer throughput that you could get out of it. But that it's also sort of like an unfair comparison, because you have more features in K6. So K6 has more features that rload didn't have, and it has JavaScript compared to Lua, and Lua was a little bit more performant because we used the very fabulous Lua JIT library, which is an amazing piece of software in itself. Written by one person, nonetheless, super cool piece of software. So the tool performed very well, but it had lots of trade-offs that I think K6 does much better. So I think on a sort of overall comparison, K6 is much better than rload ever was.
What is your favorite feature of K6? Just one, and not like a real general one, but like a very granular feature that you just love.
I really love.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, no, it's fine. I really love but maybe this is too commercial, but I really like the fact that you can very easily switch from running stuff sort of locally to the cloud. And I'm not only saying that because of the commercial aspect. It's actually something we spent. It's actually something we spent a lot of time making sure would be possible. So we, for example, made sure that you can't load or save any files in the test logic itself. You have to do that sort of in the global scope, so the code that's being run before any virtual users are actually executed. I mean, in the main function of the virtual users. So we spend a lot of time and continue to spend a lot of time making sure that's the case, that a test can run equally well locally as well as in our cloud. And the third execution mode, which we eventually want to support, but so far have not prioritized, is offering sort of cluster distributed support for the open source version as well. So we made a commitment in the beginning to support all of those three execution modes without the user having to make any script changes. And I'm proud actually that we have managed to achieve that and continue to sort of stick to that as a goal, because I think it's very easy to make those kinds of decisions where you because you want to implement a feature fast enough, you shortcut, and then you break those kinds of promises that you initially held dear. But we haven't done that so far, and I'm pretty proud of that. So
Definitely, and I think that speaks for the openness of K6 as well, because you could just as well turn it around and think of it like, if you ever got started on the cloud version and then you realized, oh, but I don't need the paid features or whatever, or for some reason you want to migrate out of it, then you don't have to rewrite all your tests. You'll be able to just move them to local execution just as well as you do it in the cloud clustered one. So that's I really think it speaks. It's a great feature in that it allows you to seamlessly move between the offerings as you please.
I also think that those like I hate when any tool, not just load testing tools, but I hate when when tools just give you like a little bit of a cool thing and then they're like, oops, well now you have to pay if you want more of that. And I love that K6 doesn't do that, because I don't think you don't need to pay for a full load test that's run on somebody on the cloud, just to troubleshoot something or to see if your script even works. I hate being nickel and dimed for things like that when I'm not even ready to run it at scale yet. I'm just trying something out. And I think it's very cleverly done that instead of doing K6 run, it's just K6 cloud. It's such a small change. I think that's a really good answer.
yeah, I mean, it's on the surface, it looks like a very small thing, right? But there's lots of
Yeah.
thought and care going into making sure that works. So I personally like that when you provide that sort of user experience benefit to the end user, but they don't necessarily realize the effort that's gone into it. So I'm silently proud over that.
And I'm just to throw in a bit of a shameless plug in there for distributed execution. As long as you're on Kubernetes, you can actually kind of do that, or you have an embryo for that in the K6 operator that you can find on GitHub on k6io/operator, and that's a passion project of mine. So if you have any input for that, feel free to let me know.
Oh, we have a couple more comments from James. How do you feel the C change? How do you feel the C change is going for performance as code? I'm seeing very few candidates with development process experience. And he also follows that up with, there's still a huge block of performance center of excellence mindset out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment, sentiment, whatever. Yeah, it's. I mean, we experience when we talk to organizations, I would say the full spectrum there. But certainly there's lots of organizations that still have the performance center of excellence approach. But I think more and more organizations are trying to sort of democratize testing and get developers involved, and that's sort of been our ambition and goal, to try to capture those organizations in that process of trying to get developers involved in testing at an earlier stage, or get the testing started at an earlier stage with developers. So yeah, it's something we I mean, we're sort of, I would say we're strong on the developer side of the spectrum and less strong maybe on the UI approach to test authoring. And we are trying to like strengthen our UI approach a bit to just make it easier for our customers to move from the performance center of excellence to the more sort of code-oriented approach to testing.
I guess
I
it
think
still kind of makes sense, or it doesn't really hurt to have a performance center of excellence either, as long as you kind of try to move them towards being mentors, or contributing with their expertise
Mhm.
in performance, rather than being the group that does all the performance testing work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I would never say that they're not useful for the organization or anything like that. I think they can contribute a lot in that, as you say, like in a mentor role, but also bringing a lot of experience that they have with testing to create sort of the foundation in terms of the code, right? So we have a number of organizations as customers that have that kind of function, the performance engineering or QA function, help out with writing the code for the more fundamental aspects of testing. So building like the frameworks that then developers can leverage to create the specific tests that they need to run on their individual like software components.
That's sort of like how many companies approach things like SRE, or things like that as well, that you have some kind of competence center or whatever that helps with the fundamentals, maybe provides a platform for you to leverage, and then it's up to the individual teams to actually leverage that and to try to create as much value or insight as possible out of that platform that they're provided. And I think that makes sense, because it might be hard to making sure that there's someone with the performance perspective on every team, especially if you have a Scrum team of say 6 to 7 members, and one of them is supposed to be a performance tester. Then that might be very, very hard for you to actually execute on in reality, given the amount of performance testers out there that you could actually put in such roles. If that makes sense.
I also think that a lot of times people think of two things as opposing. One is the X as code, so test as code or infrastructure as code or whatever as code, versus the low code movement or the no code movement. But I think that people are realizing more and more that they're not necessarily arguing against each other, because I think people who advocate for the no code approach or the low code approach are actually operating under the assumption that code automatically means, complex syntax and very strict rules for how you say things. I think that the industry as a whole, I mean, tech in general, is moving towards a form of code that's not as strict and easier to understand and easier to get into. And in that case, both of those seemingly opposing groups are really going in the same direction. They just have to figure it out. So it's actually more about making code itself accessible. And we're already seeing that with different programming languages like Python. It's a lot easier to express what you want to do now when there are levels of abstraction.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That and I think the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. I think you can cater to both ends of the spectrum by sort of layering the cake, if you will. So, which is basically what we are trying to do as well, trying to have a sort of test as code base, and then build sort of the more UI no code layers on top of that. And then you can sort of like peel the onion as you see fit for your organization, or for different teams or different personas within your organization.
James has a follow-up question that I think, well, maybe you can share a bit about what we're working on in this area. Are there plans to enhance the analytics in K6 Cloud? For example, advanced regression analysis on specific test steps over time, enhanced multidimensional charting, etc.?
Yes, it's the short answer. Yeah, we typically, I mean, from a product perspective, we tend to look at the product as sort of three different areas. So test creation or test authoring, test execution, and result analysis. And our aim has always been to try to aid our users as much as we can in all of those areas, both with the open source offering and even more so with the commercial offering. And for, if we separate the two, so if you speak about the open source offering, yes, we do try to add, for example, different extensions to K6, so it can interface with other also third-party solutions for doing result analysis. So, for example, different APM tools or observability tools. And there is, I think, now also an extension that can output HTML reports from K6.
That was cool.
So that's the approach that we take with the open source. We try to more or less make it as a platform, and then people can extend it with various extensions to sort of suit their specific needs. And then with the cloud version, K6 Cloud, we try to be a little bit more opinionated on how we see things. And we are pretty big on trying to help through automation. So we do automation in terms of the execution. So we manage machines and infrastructure automatically for users. They don't have to tell us how many nodes they need. They just tell us how many users, and we manage how many machines that equates to. And same with the results. We have sort of the seed of what we eventually want to build in our feature called Performance Insights. So we try to use our expertise that we have in the performance engineering space and build algorithms out of it to aid people in our users in the result analysis. We try to detect performance problems in the data that we collect and alert users to that with the Performance Insight feature. And today it only looks at one single test, but the goal is to build this out so you can look at tests over time, so it can compare metrics over the course of different time periods, basically to alert users to drifts in performance or whatever metric they're interested in, basically.
Robin, that's actually my favorite feature of K6,
I
and
know.
I think it's really one of the features that sold me. Performance Insights is just, I mean, it's very biased of me to say it now, but you were there when you interviewed me, and I said at the time that that was the standout feature because I don't see it in any other tool. And I think a lot of people have the misconception that that the difficult part about load testing is actually scripting it and carrying it out. But I think it's definitely in the analysis because you just end up with so much data. And it's hard to look through that and filter out what's important and what's not. So I am so for anything that makes that easier and just spells it out in human language for people.
And that's really interesting as well. I'm thinking of how I usually personally try to see the differences between the cloud and the OSS product, and that what we're actually, or what we're offering to users in terms of the cloud offering is the convenience, right? Because everything you can do in the K6 Cloud, you can do that yourself as well, but you get access to all the years in your case, what did you say, 14 years of experience in that kind of field, right? Where we have opinions and best practices and things that we would like to look at for a load test. And if you have that knowledge yourself, then you maybe could set it up yourself. But to save you time, we just offer you that out of the box for the cloud. Would you say that's a fair distinction between the two, or do you see it in any other way?
No, I would say that's pretty fair. I mean, there are differences, of course, between the open source and cloud, and what makes sense to build into one versus the other. But in the specific case of the performance insight feature, we reasoned that a lot of users of our product, of the cloud product, as we've seen at least over the last couple of years, there is a lot of new people getting into performance testing as part of their daily job. So these organizations that are trying to shift left, as marketeers tend to call it, where you try to involve developers in the performance testing, they don't have much experience with performance testing, so naturally they feel a little bit lost sometimes when you just dump a lot of metrics in front of them. So having a feature that can help them, understand what are the important bits, what do I need to focus on. That was sort of the background on why we decided to pursue this feature.
Yeah, because as Nicole mentioned, I mean, you can set up Grafana. We even provide a Docker Compose file for that, and you can have Grafana up in literally under 5 minutes and have metrics propagate there as well. But actually making that actionable and making it into something that delivers any value for you, that actually takes quite some time, even if you use any of the preset dashboards that are available for Grafana. And with the cloud, you basically get to look at what matters from the first test run, in a way.
We should probably say, by the way, that if we mention things like we're working on this, please don't hold us to it, and please don't ask for a timeline, because I mean, we're trying to be transparent, but with that transparency comes a certain element of risk, because who knows what will happen. Maybe we'll find out that it was more complicated than we thought. But maybe, are we able to share like what we are currently working on, the content of the cycles for right now, Robin?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we have quite recently started working in a more sort of structured 8-week cycles. And yeah, if we look at the sort of separation of test authoring, execution, and result analysis, we are currently on a what do you say, path to enhance sort of the test authoring experience that we have in the cloud service. So now I'll be speaking primarily about the cloud service. So we're trying to add some of the more sort of hygiene features from a performance testing perspective to the sort of graphical experience of the cloud service. We have our test builder, which is the point and click UI for creating tests. So we're trying to add things to that experience that would allow you to, and that's not actually for this cycle, but it's incoming in future cycles, to upload, say, CSV files, for example, so you can parameterize tests easier. And we're also looking to add multi-scenario support to the test builder, which is something we don't have today. You can only run tests with single scenarios. So if you want to use multi-scenarios, you have to use the script editor or trigger test runs from the K6 CLI. So it's some sort of quality of life improvements, I would say, to be able to create more realistic tests in the test builder. And then on the results analysis side of things, we recently added the test failure rate, or sorry, not test, but the HB failure rate metric, which was a sort of big gap, I think, in our result analysis experience. So that was a pretty big thing, I think, and something several of us had waited quite a long time for. But for various reasons, we hadn't implemented it before. But we're also making strides in improving the the performance insight feature. So we're looking to add more alerts and add also scoring of the alerts, so that we can communicate sort of the importance of alerts comparatively to other alerts, etc.
This is where us being opinionated comes in, right? Because we have to draw the line between trying to give people best practices that they don't have to try to figure out for themselves and imposing what we want, right? It's kind of difficult to decide when it's too much. But I personally think that most users would be happy to accept what we think are best practices. And I think people who are more advanced would probably be using the CLI anyway. To You can still like completely ignore what we're saying and run your own thing, right?
Yeah, I think that's the good thing, or that's what I personally like with having sort of an open source foundation, is that you can decide yourself if you want to use the commercial parts that we develop or not, right? And even if you use our commercial service, you don't have to use the UI test creation options, right? You can still stick to scripting and continue using the CLI and just triggering test runs in the cloud from your CLI. So I personally like that you have that flexibility in choosing how you combine these two tools, basically. Yeah.
I know Sigma would say that he mainly would use he would mainly just start with a JavaScript script for K6 when he's creating a test rather than going through the test builder. I'm curious what you would use if the test builder, let's say the test authoring project has finished and all of those features have been built in. Do you think you would still use test builder or go straight to the JavaScript still?
I think it depends on what I would be testing. If I were testing an API or a microservice, I think I would go for scripting first. If I was testing a website or a web app, which was more sort of UI oriented, I would probably start with a recording. So whenever I've done actual projects previously earlier in my life for clients, I typically started with a recording just so I didn't have to write all of the various requests that went into the user journey myself. So basically, like letting the tool aid me in the test authoring experience. And then if I thought one of these steps would be easier to solve with code, I would switch from whatever the UI approach provided me with. I would switch over to the code mode and then make changes. But I would start with the more graphical approach if I did websites or web apps, basically.
They're using the recordings to get started. That's actually a great approach in general, I think, and I would probably do that as well, Nicole. Because then you actually know that you don't forget anything, right? So you actually get some help in figuring out what the actual request should be, what headers you need to put in, or because if you didn't use the recording, then it's quite easy to just go straight for the API and forget about things like, okay, so what else are we doing? Are we serving any HTML? Are we getting any other static assets? Or do we need to pass any like specific headers to get it to behave the way it would behave for a user that we don't do if we just hammer at the API? So I
Yeah.
definitely think there's a case to be made for starting out with a recording just to make sure you get a good boilerplate for whatever you're testing.
Yeah. I would say, Nicole can correct me here if I'm wrong, but I would say it's a pretty well established best practice to start out tests with a recording, just because you get
Yeah.
that like initial sort of boilerplate stuff down, right? And then you can go in and change it and modify it and add parameterization, etc., to make it more dynamic and realistic. But just to save time and not have to make all of those small mistakes. I mean, there's all kinds of edge cases, right? Like a server is not going to respond to you unless you have a certain header, and if you hand code that script, you might not add that header. Whereas if you make the recording, you would probably get that header. So I just know from my experience, at least, I've saved a lot of time using recordings as the foundation, and then sort of doing whatever on top of that.
But I guess that kind of depends on the scope as well, right? As you said, if you want to do an end-to-end test, then it definitely makes sense to go for the recording. But if you are a developer working in a team and trying to create sort of a performance unit test against a specific feature that you're working on, maybe in that case it would make more sense to dive straight into the code because you already have all parts of that specific feature in your head because you've just written it, right?
Yeah, I mean, but again, I think it depends on the complexity of the system you're testing also, and again, I think if you're testing APIs and microservices, it makes sense to just go for code, and in many cases, there's nothing to record because it's just machine to machine interactions. And I think also when it comes to website and web app testing, I mean, we have sort of one missing component, right? And I'm going to go there now. is that we don't support browser-based testing, right? So we only have protocol-based testing. And if you have the browser level testing, you can, I think, more realistically maybe start by doing scripting, because you don't have to do all of those individual like static asset requests, etc. You just tell whatever automation tool you're using that, direct the browser at this URL, and then the browser will automatically load all of the dependent assets. So the script becomes much more maintainable because the size of the script is much smaller than if you use a protocol level tool where you have to have all of those resources in line in your script, and the script just balloons because of that fact. So I think that's sort of like a missing piece in our toolbox as well for website and web app testing.
I'm pretty bullish on browser-based testing in general, because I think if it weren't for the fact that it's more resource intensive, I think it would be way easier to do browser-based load testing than if you're looking at a site, not an API, of course, than traditional protocol level tools. It's just so much easier to say, look for this a button with this string on it and click it. That's so much easier than having to specify, what kind of request it is and what header should be in there. It's easier, and it's closer to the no code approach where it's like you can almost just talk normally, click this and type that, instead of having to deal with the protocol level stuff.
Yeah, it's certainly more approachable, I think, for more people, reasoning in terms of like interactions rather than, okay, what is the actual protocol level requests and messages going across the wire.
Although it might be worth pointing out that it's not really, or at least I would say, so you can feel free to override me if you disagree, but it makes sense to point out that it doesn't really make sense for all types of tests either to use the browser, because then you're introducing another variable, and that is how long it takes for your browser to process whatever it is served from that endpoint. And in some cases, you might not be that interested in, for instance, JavaScript processing time or redrawing the DOM. Maybe you just want the pure performance of your API, and then going through the browser only muddies the results down and makes them harder to interpret, because you don't know really where the bottleneck is.
Yeah, I think as usual, there's usually not like one size fits all. So I think in some cases it's going to be beneficial to use a browser-based solution, sometimes a protocol level solution, and sometimes a mix of the two is the best approach, where you perhaps generate the bulk of the traffic using protocol level, but then you maintain a few users running in a browser just so you can get the sort of end user end-to-end perspective. And see what that experience was like, right? So how long did it take before the page became interactable, and how long did it take before the page could render? That's interesting also when you are measuring a system at some load or level of load.
Yeah, I'm totally for that. I don't like to choose sides in almost anything. I always want it all. So yeah, I think if it makes sense for your application, you should be doing both, because they show different things. It's performance. You're measuring performance that's has a front end component to it, and then protocol level always tests the back end performance. So why not both, right? I think that would be the ideal. So that's what we're working towards. We don't have that yet. Just want to make it clear in case people got confused.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something we're working towards, because we hear it requested quite a lot, because there's no shock that this exists in many other solutions. So of course we also get that question if we have it, and we have said no for for many years now. But we're working towards being able to offer that as well. And as you say, I think it has a lot of benefits, because it gives you that extra perspective of seeing also what the actual experience of your end users would look like. So you don't necessarily need to run the full load from browsers, but at least having
Yeah.
a few virtual users run through a browser, you get that perspective as well. And I think it's just very helpful to see what the system or the website or whatever you're testing, what it looks like from the end user perspective when you're sending lots of traffic to it.
And I guess in that case, it would make sense to also be able to specify what type of device your browser is running on, or to get into those sorts of details as well. Because I kind of think there is a difference to Chrome running on a new MacBook Pro versus running on a low-end Android cell phone for $40 on Wish, right? So maybe if you want to get the actual experience for the user, you have to simulate those conditions as well, making it harder as well.
Yeah, I would say so. If you're interested in the end user experience, and you have a mix of traffic, right? So different devices, different regions, different internet connections, even. Then that's interesting, of course, understanding what the different users' experience would be. So yes, it's more interesting than if you're just using protocol level, because then it's more about what's the performance of the backend systems. Then it doesn't really matter if you're simulating 4G connection compared to an unlimited fiber connection as much, I would say, at least, because you're just trying to determine sort of what the concurrency limits are of the backend system.
Yeah. Given that you're speaking mainly from, or you mentioned that you're speaking mainly from the cloud perspective, if anyone has any input on these kind of features, or if they would like to contribute with ideas or different problems that they have that they want to get solved in K6 Cloud, is there anywhere that they should go to, or where can they sort of get in touch with us and air those ideas or questions?
Their ideas. Yeah, so we have a GitHub repo for that. So github.com/k6io/k6 cloud feature request, something like that. So there's a repo where you can add an issue and both request features or just have a discussion on something relating to performance and our product. And we'll happily have discussions or give input on features and how we see those features, if they're interesting from our perspective and our roadmap, or if we don't think they make much sense for us at the moment. But we're always happy to have discussions and try to be as transparent as we can with sort of stuff we're working on, etc.
What are some areas maybe that you would like to see K6 grow into in the next 5 years?
So, I mean, we've developed K6 to be sort of a technology platform for testing. So I'm very much interested in seeing how K6 can be applied in other types of testing beyond just load testing. So seeing how it can be used for functional testing, integration testing. We are also very much interested in chaos engineering, right, Sime? So we're trying to explore different areas of testing and quality assurance and see where we can make an impact, basically. So it's quite open, I would say, without much specifics decided in terms of how we would approach these things, or if we would implement any of them. But we're interested in exploring and talking to users and customers how they do those kinds of testing today, and then trying to figure out if we can build products to help engineering teams become more mature in how they do software engineering.
James is asking whether we have any plans for offering a certification program for K6 developers, and I guess from the cloud perspective, or rather from the open source perspective at least, that's definitely something that we've been discussing. We don't have any concrete plans yet, but it's definitely a topic that we're interested in exploring more in the future, because it kind of makes sense to be able to prove to future employees or potential employers that you're able to operate with a certain piece of software. And we definitely see a rising demand for K6 knowledge among um, in job ads, basically. So you that would definitely make sense in some way.
Oh, look, it's Sid from DevOps Directive. We had him on last week on the show as well. It's nice to see him here. Um, I actually I don't I have plans for the certification program. I haven't shared it with people yet, but I think we've already talked about we're already making steps towards the beginnings of it, which is creating the content in the first place, having a nice educational course that kind of walks you through what is load testing in the first place, and also how do you start with load test just to load test in K6. I think the end result of that, once we have something that we're really happy with, then we can start making it into some sort of certification program that maybe would help with onboarding if you're a big organization with a testing team or even a development team. It's just really easy to be able to point them somewhere and say go through this, and then there's like a little test at the end.
Definitely. One of the hard things about certification in particular is that it usually requires some kind of proctoring or similar to hold any kind of value to a potential employer, because otherwise, how would you ensure that the person that shows the certificate is the one that wrote the certification test? And those kind of issues still need to be sorted out to be able to make a formal certification program. But at the same time, getting some kind of diploma for finishing a K6 course or something like that, that would probably be more within the near future distance than a formal certification program. But as we've all said, I think we don't have any concrete plans yet, so we'll just have to see how that turns out.
I think the way that Coursera does it is they try to identify you based on how you type. It's pretty interesting. So they have this honor code, and you say, "I am Nicole van der Hoeven. I certify that this is me, and I'm not cheating and whatever." And then they ask you to do it at the time of the test. And supposedly there's enough of like a fingerprint with how you type that they can tell the difference. I don't know how good it is, but that's just from my experience in being on the student side taking a course with them. That's how they do it. I think that's pretty interesting.
We got a comment from, uh, I might be mispronouncing this. Feel free to let me know in that case. But Yevananthan Kesavan, who says that he's already using K6 for smoke, functional regression, and performance testing, making tests reusable across. That's really encouraging to hear, because
Awesome.
that's what we're aiming for sure.
Yeah, that's what we like to hear, because that's one of the goals with K6, making tests reusable across different types of tests. So that's super nice to hear.
I would
Definitely.
love to see a comment like that a few years from now saying, I'm also using K6 for functional testing and chaos engineering and accessibility testing. That I would love that. And parts of it are already possible. Maybe not accessibility, but chaos engineering. Some experiments can certainly be done with K6 now, as I'm finding out. Where would you like to go in terms of observability?
If you're asking me, observability.
Yeah.
So observability is, very close to what we are doing in the sense that when you test a system, the metrics that we collect in a load test or any type of test will be from the client side perspective, and the observability tools, they give you the inside perspective, so they can turn an otherwise black box into a white box, so to speak. And from that perspective, it's interesting data for us. because we could, if going back to the performance insights feature again, and us wanting to try to automate result analysis, having access to server-side data, we could go further in that kind of analysis and look towards sort of the root cause of performance problems. That's sort of a long-term goal and ambition of ours, and we've had it for many years, and continue to think it's an interesting area. And observability is naturally also blends with the sort of larger reliability space that we are in as well. So I think we're naturally very close to observability companies, and they frequently come up when we talk to organizations, right? That, hey, we have this observability tool and we use K6. How can we, use the data together? So,
And
Makes
that's
me
also
think
one
of-
of the.
Sorry,
Go
Nicole,
ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's also one of the things we're working on right now. I think we have a project to be able to export Prometheus metrics from
Yes.
K6 Cloud, which would open that up even more.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to make the metrics that you have in K6 Cloud available in those observability or APM tools is something we're trying to achieve. Yeah. So we have support for some vendors today, and we're trying to make it more general by supporting more open standards like Prometheus. Yeah.
You were saying,
And
Simon?
yeah, that Daniel that's been on a couple of times as well on the stream. He and I have been working a little bit on a proof of concept, if you will, about using K6 for distributed tracing as well, and having that sort of tracing IDs propagate throughout the whole system, so you'll be able to follow each specific request and do sampling of what happens even within the system. So I'm going to put the link to that project in the comments. So if you want to try that, you're definitely welcome. We'd love to hear all your feedback on that as well.
Wow, what a nice comment from James again. Thank you for all your work. K6 has revitalized my career and performance testing in general. Wow. How much are we paying this guy? That's great. That's so nice to hear.
Yes.
Sounds like it's about time that we send some swag James's way.
Wait a minute, we
Yeah.
haven't sent him anything yet?
I don't think so. So if you're interested in getting some K6 swag, James, feel free to hit me up on the forum. You know where to find me. So we'll send you some cup or a t-shirt or some stickers so you can show your
A sticker.
K6 support.
Yeah, it's a very
That's
nice
really
comment.
why he wrote that comment.
Yeah, it's a very nice comment. It's very heartwarming to hear that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
as we've been
definitely.
working on K6 for such a long time. So it's yeah, thanks so much.
All right, so we have about 2 minutes left of the stream. Do you have anything that you would like to share, Robin, that we haven't talked about, or something that you'd like to plug, maybe a personal project or anything else that you're working on that you would like to?
Oh my God, was that a pointed question or what?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's not
I
like
mean,
we've been asking you about something in particular.
yeah, so I mean, I'm very interested in the browser based testing, since it's been something that's been missing from our offering for so many years. So yeah, I mean, I'm involved in that effort, trying to bring something out, and as usual, we'll start by releasing something as open source, and then build commercial stuff on top of that.
Yeah.
So that's something that's coming. Hopefully, in the next few months, we'll have something out in the open source, and then we'll build commercial stuff on top of that.
I was actually
Look out for
more
that.
thinking about your love for synthesizers rather than the.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, stay tuned for that as well.
A new startup.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so it's been really great to have you on, and thanks for offering to come on the show, and thanks for volunteering your time to interact with the community. It's been a blast.
Of course. Thanks so much, and anytime.
Thanks everyone for watching as well. We'll catch you next week. Same time, same place.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.